Hello and welcome to the Groupthink Podcast. Joining us today is two very special guests. They're missionaries from South Africa, Abbey and Servaas Hofmeyer. How you both doing?
Doing good, thanks, Tyler.
Yeah, very well, thanks.
So I've been wanting to talk to you guys for a while because I reached out to Abbey about a year ago because I had a lot of questions about what your ministry was doing. Obviously, I know your dad, so I mean, when I heard about where you guys were, I wanted to know a little bit about it. So, how did you end up becoming a missionary to South Africa?
Yeah, well, I knew that I wanted to be a missionary, or if not a missionary, working cross-culturally almost my entire life. And so it wasn't a huge jump, as far as my thinking to move to South Africa. But it came about, I was in graduate school. I was studying Christian formation and ministry at Wheaton College. And I was looking for a type of internship over the summer. And I spoke with the professor and shared with him just my passions for ministry and philosophy of ministry and values and all of those things. And he pointed me to East Mountain to do a 6-week internship there. And I went there as an intern, but really exploring whether or not that's a place that I could live and minister with full time. And that's actually how I met Servaas. And 2 years later, I arrived. So I've been in South Africa for 2 years, and Servaas, he was born and raised here. Yeah.
What was it like coming to South Africa for the first time?
Oh, goodness. Well, the first time that I came, I was a part of East Mountain's internship program called Summit. And what that is, it's a 6-week exploratory internship experience where people from all over the world, it's intentionally diverse, come and they live together in one house. And they are developed holistically, so spiritually, theologically, practically. So that a huge part of that experience while you're taking workshops and while you're visiting local ministries and doing theological study is living in one house with people who grew up entirely different than you. So I think my first experience as far as South Africa was so positive. I mean, it was amazing how I made connections with people who grew up, in a township, spoke a different language than me, had different opportunities than me, and yet we connected on a heart level. So I think my first exposure to South Africa was very positive. I had sort of I don't want to say a love, because I think that love takes time, but I felt I was very intrigued by the country and the history and the beautiful people that I met, and the natural scenery is just gorgeous. It's where we live, it's mountains and oceans, and so all of that made it, along with the ministry, made it an easy decision to come. But then, when I arrived, it was really the normal things that any missionary experiences, I think, with culture shock and being in an unfamiliar environment. It's sort of like playing a game where you don't know the rules, and so you kind of learn as you go. Luckily, Servaas, being South African, was super helpful for me. It helped me interpret some of my experiences. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's...
No, it's good. So how did you two meet then?
You want to share that? I can do a lot of the talking.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, so when Abbey came over the first time for the Summit internship that she mentioned, during that time I was working with the organization that she was doing the internship with East Mountain. And yeah, so we lived in the same house where she was with her group of interns doing Summit. I was on staff, and yeah, so during that time, yeah, we we met. Yeah, that's the the very simple way of putting it. We met during that time, and after that time, she went back to the States, and I actually also left the organization shortly after that, going to study in England for a year. So
he actually, this is interesting. It's in the news. He actually studied philosophy under Roger Scruton, who just passed away.
Really?
I've seen that in the news. Yeah.
Holy wow! I mean, wow! I didn't. That's amazing.
Yeah. So we did long distance for a year and a half, and then he moved back from the UK to South Africa, and I moved to South Africa shortly after.
Yes. So that's how it went.
Yeah, that's the story.
Oh. So, obviously, part of a lot of the reason why I wanted to talk with both of you is because I kind of wanted to air some criticisms that I seem to have gotten from you when I was asking you about the issues in South Africa. Because obviously, my perspective as an American, especially a millennial American, on what's going on in South Africa is tempered by the fact that I don't know that much about it. Right. So I remember I told you, I think there was a Nelson Mandela movie I saw a couple of years ago, so I know what apartheid is in like the most macro Hollywood version of it. But but obviously, and I sent you as an addendum to that, I sent you the Farmlands documentary, which was made by a very conservative activist in Canada. And that's pretty. A lot of people think that it's very accurate, and a lot of people don't know the full context behind it or the history. So I'm curious as to what you guys, as Servaas, as someone on the ground who's lived in South Africa for most of their life, like what are what is it like living in South Africa, and what is it like? What do you think the most serious issues are living there?
Yeah, so I think to start with, any question about South Africa will vary very much depending on who you ask. I mean, I don't just mean what their views are or where they stand politically, but just because we're such a diverse people who really grew up very differently depending on almost which social category you fell in, which was, you mentioned apartheid, so it was very much government enforced race classifications and almost different rules counted for different people. And so in that itself, I can give you a good answer of my life as a white Afrikaans speaking South African, which would be very similar to the life in many ways of an English speaking white South African. But even those two are different cultures with differences. But although we were all sort of in your privileged class, you can call that. So yeah, for me, I was born towards the end of apartheid. So really, when I gained understanding as a young kid, apartheid was sort of coming to an end. I mean, for years, people knew it will eventually end, but people didn't know how, and will it end well, and what is the best political solution, but yeah, so like I say, when you came of age where your parents started talking to you about it, we started learning about Nelson Mandela will be freed, and sort of those type of explanations from prison, and people live in different places around us because it was the law basically told people where they can live and who can live where in which neighborhood. So every town was sort of divided like that. So yeah, in that sense, for me, you grew up obviously with a lot of the apartheid mindset was still, or the reality was around you. And even though many things weren't spoken, it's sort of how you saw the world. So that's, what you saw around you, but then also growing up further, you grew up in what we would say the democratic South Africa. So in many ways, my upbringing was very Western, with your typical in many ways your first world privileges and everything. And whereas, yeah, if you ask the same question to people from other parts of the country or in other race groups, they would obviously answer you very differently. So I'll say that for now, and then you can ask further questions. Otherwise, I just ramble on and don't know which side to take it all from.
Yeah, but that's a really important.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, but you said you also asked. You had a second part to your question where you asked something about the main issues facing the country or something. If you can repeat that.
Yeah, like what is contemporary? Obviously, apartheid kind of colors every as far as the history of South Africa contemporarily. I'm sure that colors everything about society as it is now, having gone through that. But what do you think are the main problems now from a national standpoint? Because like I said, I sent Abbey the Farmlands documentary, which makes the case that there are huge issues with crime in the farm areas of the country. There's a lot of government pressure to start taking land from white farmers. There's stuff like that. Like, what do you think is the most prescient stuff going on right now?
Yes. Okay. So I'm familiar with that documentary. I haven't seen it, but I know sort of the narrative around it. And so, while there's definitely real issues around crime on farms, and a lot of it is pretty brutal, wild crime sometimes, but which also has many reasons for it, which if you listen to criminologists explain why it is, that is one thing. But then also in the bigger context, crime is big across the country and across sort of your different demographics and places within the country. Cities, I think as with any country, your cities will be mostly where crime happens, especially then your bigger cities, more so than your smaller cities sometimes, where money is basically. So that's one issue, and obviously the thing about the farm thing is it's very much also because of farms are isolated, they're soft targets. There's a perception that there's money on farms. There's a lot more detail to go into it, but that's definitely a problem. And I think some people who want to highlight that also, I think the positive part of highlighting it is that they want it to be a priority crime, like many other crimes, that this is a problem. We require a national police strategy to think, how are we going to stop farm murders, in particular farm attacks. So that's on that. You can also more if you want to, but then I would say the biggest questions facing us is, like you said, apartheid has its own legacy, which everything in some way, can be sort of traced through that and was affected by that. Then I think there's just a lot of state institutions that's not doing great, and that's maybe a euphemism. Also, we've gone through our previous president, he served for 2 terms, Jacob Zuma.
How long is he?
10 years, for 10 years. And under him, there was a lot of corruption, basically almost ran freely through a lot of government structures. And over the years, under him and before him, but I don't know to which extent but definitely everything escalated immensely under him. There was just a lot of, what would you call it, just appointments of, what's the word for it, but people appointing their family, their friends, whoever, nepotism, yes. And under a lot of that, a lot of state institutions sort of imploded, and especially things like education, healthcare. So I think one of our big issues is education being very poor, and even the structures that are there, that there's very few people who get quality sort of, international standard education, where a lot of kids grow up from early childhood development. They totally miss out on that, which puts them behind sometimes for life, I think. And so you have this thing where people grow up, the majority of the country are often very poorly educated, just because it's just, not up to par. And I think then in all of that, we see another thing we spoke about earlier today. 30% of South Africa, our unemployment rate is 30%, which it means, I think they said 10.3 million adults looking for work can't find work. So that 30%, 30% is probably even higher if you just talk about people who just gave up looking for work. So that is sort of your big issues. And if you think of all of that, it's a fertile environment for crime to be a very just good option to make your way through life. And so it's crime happens on many levels. It happens within the state structures. Just very great corruption, and it's being revealed more and more. So those are your critical issues. And then there's a lot of infrastructure are failing because these institutions are failing. We struggle with our electricity provider. It's one, so there's a monopoly of one electricity provider that provides electricity to the country, which is state-run, and which over time has just been badly managed, to put it sort of bluntly. And we see things where we're in situations where they cut electricity every once in a while for a few hours per day across the country, just so that our provider can maintain the load. So all of those issues, throw them together, and then maybe many that I haven't mentioned.
I think one that, as an outsider's perspective, as someone who's a guest here in this country, one of the things that you notice almost immediately driving from the airport to where we live is the poverty. And so South Africa has the largest gap between the rich and the poor in the entire world. It's a nation with the largest gap. So, Stellenbosch is gorgeous. It's beautiful architecture, amazing food, you feel like you're on holiday there. And right across the street is a township where people are, living in shacks, living in poverty without plumbing, maybe without electricity. And so it's one of the things that you notice almost immediately in the country. And, that's one of the effects of apartheid, and also the failure of some of these infrastructure things that Servaas was talking about. So there's an enormous gap in multiple areas between people groups. So, all of those are challenges.
Sure. I mean, how much is that? How much is having a national issues like this conducive to political extremism? I don't want to keep going back to the documentary, but again, this is this is my knowledge of this. A lot of this is stuff I've never heard before. So in the documentary, they had an interview with a more or less a communist, and who's basically said they want to rip the country apart and confiscate huge amounts of land. To what degree is that common? And are people mostly kind of trying to get along in spite of everything, or is there a lot of hostility and resentment?
Yes, so my guess would be that who they had on that documentary might have been a man called Julius Malema, possibly. I don't know if you can remember the name, but so you do get those voices. In his political party is called the EFF, Economic Freedom Fighters, and they dress in red. They dress sort of in sort of working class type outfits. They wear their berets, so they very much they act as a face for the worker. And but at the same time, I think the longer they've gone on, the more they've sort of almost shot themselves in the foot, because the more people are revealing also their own corruption and how they are basically living like kings while pretending to stand for the poor, but they live in the grandest hotels, drink French champagne, buy almost all the European stuff while they apparently fight for the poor. So I think those voices, while they are there, they're in a sense just failing for themselves, or letting themselves fail as their true colors are revealed. And then the ANC, who's the ruling party, who really has the power and the biggest voice, they, on many levels, they are definitely economically quite socialistic, left-leaning. But then you also get people within the ANC. So there's such a big party that there's factions within the ANC. So you do definitely get more your free market, business-minded people within there. Our current president is more of he's a businessman in his own right. He's I don't know what, millionaire of some sort, just through business, and a very economically literate guy. So he's sort of more your free market type of guy, wants to invite business into what happens when decisions are made, when policies are made. But then I think he's also in a difficult spot, because within his party you can't be too openly, too vocally that in the ANC, because their idea is very much framed sort of in socialist terms. So those guys that you would see in the video, I mean, I think they would probably give actual footage of them. So they do say things that is super crazy and that should be for any, I mean, that could bring them before Human Rights Commission. And people try and do that when they make accusations of just kill these people, or these people must watch out. And, so they are definitely polarizing figures. But I would say the man on the ground across racial lines, they are hoping for better. They don't desire disruption and chaos and crime and violence. It does break out at times, understood, but I mean, like I've explained, it's you can almost expect it to break out. But it's not even often black versus white. I mean, that's almost not the big thing. What happens is more within the poor communities, things go violent, because that's, and often South Africans versus non-South Africans.
Right.
That is a big thing. They'll talk about xenophobia, and whenever things go bad, those guys also, not necessarily Julius Malema, but within certain communities, they would start and say, oh, here's all the Nigerians in our community, let's break down their businesses because they are taking our jobs. So there's also this very big dependence, or idea of dependence on the state. And I think in that sense, there's still a very communal, at times, maybe you'll politically describe it as communism, or at least the communist talking guys speak to these people, because it's, I mean, they're in extreme poverty often, so it's very much and you have to understand, is that the communists, when we were still in the old South Africa under apartheid, the communists worked with the ANC to bring about liberation for South Africa. And so I think that also has a part to play as far as communist sympathies. Because in many ways, they were the good guys as far as
fighting for liberation, fighting against apartheid and oppressive policies and things like that. I think that's...
Yeah, I would say that there was definitely the communists stood, or at one level anyway, because things also changed, stood with the oppressed. You can say that at least. And so a lot of, but then also anyway, not to go too deep into history, but so there is the communism and ANC is intertwined, and again, I don't speak as an expert on it or knowing the party policies, but there's it's always in the mix there, and the ANC is always, since the beginning, I mean, at least since the beginning of democracy, the ANC and the South African Communist Party are always in coalition. So there's always communists around the table, and they have to be considered, and the trade unions is very much part of, I think, the voices within the ANC. So, and it's,
But to answer your question about the farmland, and I haven't watched the whole documentary, but I have watched the trailer, and to me, I was, and this is, maybe biased, but I was frustrated by the trailer even, because it seemed like she was trying to highlight the vocal minority, and it seemed like a really polarizing documentary that doesn't reflect the majority of South Africans and does highlight extreme racist views. It felt like fear-mongering to me, like she had some type of political agenda, and she was trying to use South Africa as somehow an example of all of the bad things that are happening. But I felt like it was inaccurate. I felt that it was super biased and didn't reflect everyday life in South Africa. I'll say one more thing. What I would add to that is, I think there's the failures are very much, and what we're facing as they are now, there's a lot of political failures. Right.
And so when those radical guys do speak out and say things like, we kill the Boer, which is sort of a term referring to the white man in general, or we won't kill you, not yet. Statements like that are sort of thrown out at political meetings and things, rallies. And I think sometimes also, even say people would feel that the ANC, for instance, or maybe other prominent political figures are very slow to condemn that, or they condemn it, but sort of not outright, or it's sort of that feeling. So that's, I think, what people find frustrating at times, is just that there's not a... Things are just very complex from all perspectives. So people say crazy things, and people expect it to be condemned outright, but then it's not condemned outright, which is, and that I think deserves criticism. But then also the people who don't condemn it, say higher up politicians, the thing is they're also in some political game, and they must be slow to criticize people to feel that's at least, I think, their thinking. So it's, I think what that film does is they take real things that happen and make it everyday, whereas it's not as everyday, and I think the society at large is not there. That's what I would say.
Okay. I mean, the last thing I want to ask you guys is more about your ministry and what you guys are doing with, like, how what is your primary focus, and what do you, and how does it helping with issues like these?
Yeah, so our primary focus is leadership development. So I work with East Mountain, and so he works in marketing that is very much an important part of the East Mountain community. So he's there almost from the beginning. But what East Mountain does is we seek to equip and serve local ministries, churches, Christian schools, nonprofits that are doing excellent kingdom work already. And we seek to come alongside them and say, how can we support you in what you're doing to address some of these issues or to disciple your people? And how can we come alongside in what God has called you to do? So one way that we do that, and what's actually my role within East Mountain, is our residency program. So I lead our residency program, our team that coordinates that. And what that is a year-long leadership development and really discipleship program aimed at emerging leaders from some of these areas that are facing these big social issues like poverty and unemployment and gangsterism and people not passing matric, which means high school. You know, all of these social problems. And basically what we do is we seek out young people who have a passion for the Lord, who have a passion to go back and serve in their home community. We say, come live with us for an entire year. And they live on a farm together. And it's people from multiple racial, economic, linguistic backgrounds, you know, all together in one house. And what we seek to do is to provide a space away from their everyday life where transformational learning can happen in cross-cultural Christian missional communities. And so that kind of happens in three different ways. That happens through a focus on spiritual formation, which is also what I teach. I lead our students in a spiritual formation class every week. That happens through theological formation, looking at the big story of the Bible. So they read the Bible in a year, almost the whole thing, while they're also taking theological classes with a local church that we're in partnership with. They're being mentored one-on-one. They are experiencing family life together, because that's another huge social issue. 60% of South Africans who are born are fatherless. That's a massive statistic. And we know how incredibly important the presence of a father is for the upbringing of a child. So we try to recreate the family in that home setting. And finally, practical leadership experience. So what we do is we essentially send our live-in residents to do internships with our partnering ministries to give them practical leadership experience under the leadership of a solid Christian leader, and expose them to what God is doing, because God is on the move in South Africa. He's doing amazing things. As many hard stories as there are hopeful stories, are amazing stories of God using people in incredible ways and people beating God. So it's sort of hard to describe unless you can see it. It's kind of one of my challenges as far as coming back to our church, Tyler, and explaining what we do. But yeah, that's what we do. We do leadership development and discipleship. And Servaas and I, we were talking the other day about how, what is the difference between an institution or a school or a hospital succeeding or not. And in many cases, it's leadership. It's a strong leader, Christ-like leader who isn't ordering people around or trying to be the boss or using knowledge as a power play, to manipulate a situation or to gain sort of an advantage over someone else. But a Christ-like servant leader, I think, can really make all the difference as far as in some of these institutions that need from the ground level up solid people. So that's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to educate the masses. We're not feeding, billions of people. We're not trying. What we're trying to do is really from the ground up, investing a ton of time into specific people, believing that God has called them to impact their communities, wanting to come alongside them because they can impact their communities and speak the gospel in a way that is understood way better than I can as an American.
Okay, that's wonderful. Before I know you guys have a hard out in a few minutes, but before I let you go, could I have you guys offer any like organizations or like literature people should look into about issues in South Africa? I know you told me I should look into Trevor Noah's book, but do you have anything you would recommend?
Oh goodness, yes, I do have things you can recommend. You probably have some too. While I'm looking at the titles that I would share. One or two.
Yeah. I'm a bit put on the spot now, but I am thinking, that the book you mentioned now is I've not read it myself, but I've read a lot about it through Abbey and some of the family that's read it, which is also, I think, a good thing for me as a local person with Abbey here as an American. It's often good to step away and look at my own culture and figure things out on my own. But do you have?
Yeah.
Okay, you can go.
Yeah. So part of what you do when you become a missionary is you try to read as many books as possible, trying to understand the local culture. So that's probably why I have more names in my head than you do. But so one of my favorite books. It was one of my favorite books even before I came to South Africa, or even had a thought in my head that I would come to South Africa. Is Cry, the Beloved Country by Alan Paton. That is an amazing book. What's the one of Lover, Prophet? Here it is. Okay, another really excellent book, and it's actually a collection of short stories written by a South African journalist, Max de well, you can say it to Afrikaans. Yeah. How do you pronounce it?
Max de Pree.
Max de Pree. And he wrote a book called Of Warriors, Lovers, and Prophets, Unusual Stories from South Africa's Past, which are a collection of true stories that often get left out of history or out of the narrative, that I think provide some of the nuance that we need in engaging some of these harder conversations. I'm looking at my bookshelf now. Ankie Krog wrote a book called Country of My Skull. And she is an amazing writer. But she was a journalist that followed the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. When apartheid was coming to an end, Nelson Mandela appointed Desmond Tutu. He was an Anglican bishop, right? And basically it was an opportunity for people to share their stories of violence and abuse and oppression, and be absolved of their crimes or tried. And so she follows that as a journalist and shares sort of the emotional toll that it took on her, and the ways that it failed, but also sort of the beautiful and redemptive moments that happen through that. So just off the top of my head, those are a couple that have been really influential for me.
That's a good start on a reading list, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think you should go with Abbey on that one, and I think it's also for me a lot of, because you're in it, so a lot of it is TV documentaries that you just watch over years, when things are on TV, and so I never really picked up a book and think, let me read up about about those things. But I think Abbey is maybe even your better advisor on that one.
Well, there you go. You live there. You know all this stuff.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, but I'm also learning. I am reading some books, but I know also some of them would not be available. It's more books written by Afrikaans people who actually. So that's also another interesting thing. But like I say, you won't necessarily find their books internationally. I read one recently about he was a white Afrikaans guy who would stand against the Nationalist Party apartheid government. So you found those people obviously along the way as well, and then their perspectives on their struggle as sort of the non-oppressed people who stood against their own people in a sense. So their stories are also obviously.
My Trader's Heart is another good one. Rian Milan is a gut-wrenching book. All of these books will make you very sad, but they're important to read. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. There's a recent documentary which I just pulled up, and I don't know if the thing is I don't know if you'll find all of this stuff internationally, but Nelson Mandela's PA, his personal assistant for many years, was an Afrikaans white lady. And she recently made a series looking back at Mandela's life, but in a very unique way, like in a different way than you would see in all the movies and documentaries, and look at sort of who were the people that shaped him. And also, obviously, through that, you get to see a lot of the politics and history, which I think, I think my general advice would be, someone once quoted that the best way to learn history is to read biographies.
Long Walk to Freedom. Read A Long Walk to Freedom.
Yeah. So you read through an individual person's life, but then you read the politics through that. So yeah, that's definitely worth looking into.
That's probably enough.
Yeah.
We've given you a lot, but
yeah, you've given my listeners a thorough library to work through, but I appreciate it. This is all really good first-hand stuff for anyone who's interested.
Yeah.
Just sorry, I didn't. Nelson Mandela's his PA's name is Zelda Lafranci. So the English you would spell it Lagrange if you would Google it, Zelda Lagrange, and you'll find her books that she's also written about him.
It's an amazing, South Africa is amazing. It is. I mean, it's an amazing history and beautiful people, and
Well, that's a good note to end on. I appreciate you both for coming on, and I may need to impose on Sir Foss later because I really want to hear more of his Roger Scruton stories. But that
yeah, I thought that you might know Roger Scruton, Tyler. I had a feeling.
Oh yeah, I would like to hear that, but obviously that's for another time. So you guys go handle your dinner, and thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks for inviting us on, Tyler.
Sure thing. Have a wonderful evening.
On our video, so we can say goodbye to you in person.
All right, bye.
Yes.
Bye.
See you.